Hi, and welcome to the Health Begins with Mom show. I am Dorit Palvanov, your host. On this podcast, I will share insights and interviews on health, parenting, and explore the question of what does it take to thrive as women, wives, and mothers. Now, let's get going with today's episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Health Begins with Mom podcast. This is Dorit Palvanov, your host. Just a reminder that the show notes from today's show can be found over at my website, healthbeginswithmom.com/EP-33. Today's interview is super important for all of us, women, mothers, and our daughters and sons and husbands as well. Basically, if you're a human being, this information is important for you to be aware of. Today, we're talking about the problem of human exposure to artificial estrogens in our food and environment and how they are making us fat, sick, and infertile. Now, estrogen is a naturally occurring female hormone. However, there are many health problems which happen as a result of too much estrogen in the body. In my work with women and teenage girls, one of the things I teach is called cycle syncing, which is how to balance out your hormones, especially estrogen, throughout the month with food, exercise, adapting how you work and study according to your monthly cycle, and of course, the way you socialize. Now, all of this would be so much easier for me and them if excess estrogen wasn't a problem in women. And I see this all the time. My clients follow rigidly what I recommend, but they still struggle with these initial symptoms, which brought them to work with me to begin with. Some of these symptoms are things like weight gain, acne, PCOS, PMS symptoms, chronic stress, anxiety, low energy, thyroid problems, etc., etc. Now, personally and from experience, I have a very, very strong gut feeling that a lot of the underlying reasoning for that is that our bodies are flooded with way too much estrogen, mostly artificial, that isn't excreted efficiently from the body, which is why it is important to support the body and especially our elimination organs and help it eliminate this excess estrogen as much as possible. And when I talk about elimination organs, I mean your digestive system, which is your colon, the liver, and yes, I mean to poop as much as possible this estrogen out. However, another way to help the body to excrete the excess estrogen is by knowing where these artificial estrogenics are coming from and what you should do in order to avoid as much of it as you can. Today on the show, I'm super excited. I have Dr. Anthony J., who is a husband, father, scientist, author, speaker, barefoot runner, I love that, and hardcore outdoorsman. Dr. J earned his PhD in biochemistry from Boston University School of Medicine, researching fats, hormones, and cholesterol. He has a gift for simplifying even the most complex cutting-edge health science research, making it relevant to everyone. Anthony is the author of the book Estrogeneration: How Estrogenics Are Making You Fat, Sick, and Infertile. Currently, Dr. J is at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, researching stem cells and epigenetics. I love that bio. Welcome, Dr. Anthony J.
Thank you.
Can I call you Anthony? It's kind of
sure, of course.
Okay, awesome. So this is totally not related, but I have to ask you this: what kind of hardcore outdoor activities do you do?
Well, this summer I caught what's called a tiger muskie. So I'm a big fisherman. A tiger muskie is a cross between a normal muskie and a northern pike. So they're fairly rare and they're really pretty fish, stripes on the side. Of course, I released it, but I used to run the fishing club in Florida at my university. So I was the president, basically the shark fishing club. So, just kind of extreme outdoor hunting and fishing and hiking. And I don't know, skydiving. You
Oh my
name it.
gosh, I love that. I love that. It's so cool. And you know what? I can totally picture you doing that while wearing that red jacket.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the camo. Yeah.
I love that. All right. So first of all, I'm super excited to welcome you as our first male guest to the show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
So also, I'd like to mention that I actually didn't know about your work until a listener of the show recommended I invite you, so you can share your knowledge and expertise, which are so important for my listeners because most of them are women and mothers, and I also know that a lot of them are women, are mothers of girls.
Mm-hmm.
So I know this is very relevant to your work. So before we dive deeper into talking about estrogenics, I just have to say how much I appreciate the fact that as a scientist, you don't come out as boring or confusing. And as I said in the intro, you do have a gift for simplifying science, which is super advanced for most people. So, so much so that there is this insane gap between these cutting edge health studies and the public. So I just wanted to personally say thank you as a woman, mother, for translating the science for all of us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. So since this show is for moms and parents, my first question for you is, what are you loving about being a father right now?
Oh, wow. Also, most people probably don't know I have 4 kids, and one of them is only 2 months old.
Oh, congratulations, Tiny.
Yeah. I just took a picture of her yesterday, actually, I have 2 girls and then a boy and now another girl. And I took a picture of her yesterday in a, like a little doll crib that my girls have. So basically she looks like a little doll. So my girls are having a lot of fun. Even my little boy is having a lot of fun. And I don't know, I love doing everything with them. We're going to go ice skating tonight and just little adventures and, just getting home from work and seeing the kids, everything.
How old are your kids?
7, 4, 2, and the newborn. It was 2, wow. It was 2, 4, 6 until recently, so it was a lot easier. Now I have to say 2, 4, 7.
Awesome.
I have to think a little bit.
I love that. Wow, 4 kids. I have 3, and oh gosh, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
All right. So before we get any further, can you tell us what's the definition of estrogenics?
Yeah, estrogenics are any chemical or molecule that acts like estrogen in your body. And sometimes I call them artificial estrogens. It kind of is the same thing. The only difference is that artificial estrogens are artificial, so man-made. But I include things in my book like soy estrogens, so plant estrogens. I include mold estrogen. So mold actually secretes a chemical that acts like estrogen in our bodies. So that's not really artificial because it's found in nature. So that's why I really do like to use the term estrogenic, which just means anything that acts like estrogen in your body. That includes natural estrogen, all these artificial estrogens, anything, like I say, that plants are secreting, that molds are secreting, that acts like estrogen in your body.
So can you give some more examples of these? Because I think when you say, do you mean synthetic estrogens? Because I think that's
included, yeah, for sure. Well, so birth control definitely makes my top 10 list, and I have a top 10 list, and that's kind of what I center my book around. Mm-hmm. But, there's more than 10, and I kind of have to lump some together to make a nice clean list of 10. But, even outside of my list, there's other chemicals like Agent Orange that act like estrogen that alter our health in long-term ways that we didn't know about, when we first created these chemicals. But obviously, we're not exposed to Agent Orange very frequently, or hopefully never. So my top 10 list in my book kind of focuses on the chemicals that we're exposed to every day, at least in America. A lot of people around the world, Europe definitely regulates a lot tighter, and they don't have near the problem that we have in America. And I'm not exactly sure on Canada. I haven't sat down and looked, how the regulations compare with things like parabens or phthalates or whatever, some of these chemicals.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. It's the same like in the States, yeah.
I'm not surprised. In America, it's really sad. I mean, we can go through the health problems, and I'm sure we will, but like, just to give you one example, because you mentioned women and mothers with girls especially, puberty, the age range for puberty just keeps lowering. And, we keep exposing our children to these chemicals. And there's no doubt within the scientific research that these chemicals drop the age of puberty. And doctors, it's so common now. There's literally scientific publications where doctors are proposing to make the normal age range of puberty lower because it's so common. They don't want to acknowledge it as a problem. They want to just redefine it, which I think is crazy, but that's how bad the problem has become.
Okay, so I mean, we sort of like defined the problem, and I think most of us understand that it is problematic, but can you just give examples of where these artificial estrogens or hormones are lurking in our day-to-day? It's like you said, there are 10 of them that we all are exposed to on a regular basis. So can you talk about them?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know, one example is sunscreen. So a lot of people use cheap sunscreen. They just go to the store and pick some up. And almost all cheap sunscreen has a chemical called benzophenone. And oxybenzone is a benzophenone. So, I mean, I hate to use these huge words, but it's the reality. It's just what these chemicals are called. You look on the labels: oxybenzone, benzophenone, 4-methylbenzylene camphor. Those are all estrogenic chemicals. They all act like estrogen, and they go through your skin, just like estrogen, just like testosterone. It's like a hormone. So it's a problem. It's an issue. So a lot of people are using these sunscreens, rubbing them on their skin, putting them on their children, and again, causing these hormone imbalances. And you go to personal care products, and then you start talking about all kinds of other ones, like phthalates. Like I said, for some crazy reason, and I'll explain what the crazy reason is, but for some crazy reason, chemical companies put phthalates into personal care products. And phthalates is a chemical that acts like an additive in plastics. So it makes plastics more rigid, more flexible, more clear. It changes the properties, kind of optimizes the properties. There's a whole number of them. It's not just one chemical. It's kind of a class of chemicals, but they act like estrogen in our body. And again, companies are putting them in our perfumes and in our fragrances. And the reason they do that, again, I said it's crazy, but they do it intentionally because it carries the perfume a little bit farther in the air and the fragrance. And they hide it on the label. They're legally allowed to hide it just under the word fragrance because it's kind of part of their secret proprietary formula they don't have to reveal legally. So rather than actually listing out these chemicals, frequently they're putting parabens and phthalates in these fragrances, and people are putting them on their skin every day. And even in the shower, I mean, yeah, we're washing these off, but again, they go through your skin, and they actually prefer to be on your skin than in water. They're just like hormones. Hormones float on water. So if I put a bunch of estrogen in a glass of water, it would actually float, just like oil or just like butter or cholesterol. They're made from cholesterol. Sex hormones are made from cholesterol.
Right.
So they float on water. So they prefer your skin over water. So when you put it on your skin and then you wash it off, those fragrance molecules, you smell them, they stay in there and they go through your skin. These non-fragrance molecules that are there also, phthalates, parabens. So personal care products are a big one. Again, I mean, there's a lot more than people realize, I think. And that's why I wrote the book, because I started digging into it and I realized it's a lot bigger problem than just the water supply, just the birth control in the water. I mean, there's just so many, and not a lot of people are talking about it. I think it's because it's more preventative health than, there's no drugs and there's no, intellectual property involved. There's not a lot of money to be made, but I think it's a problem people need to know about.
So the reason that these chemicals are still in these personal care products, is it because the industry is unregulated?
For sure. They should definitely make these illegal. And BPA is another good example. And that goes beyond personal care products into plastics again. The BPA clearly should be made illegal. In fact, phthalates should clearly be made illegal. They're worse than BPA in most cases in terms of our health. I mean, you should read, in the last chapter of my book, I have this block quote from a scientific journal about phthalates and how bad they are. And I mean, it's just like unbelievable, the health problems. It just goes on and on and on. And again, these are legal chemicals. It's insane. And BPA, what happened in America is the federal government should have made BPA illegal a long time ago, but they haven't. So 17 states have come in and made it illegal, made BPA illegal. But what the companies have done in those cases is they switched to, so BPA stands for bisphenol A. It's just a chemical. And what companies do when BPA is illegal, they make bisphenol S. They make BPS, or they make BPF, or they make BPAF, right? They make all these analogs that are almost identical to BPA, but they're not technically BPA. And literally, I've got quotations from scientific research that say BPAF, BPS, BPS, all these BPA analogs are just as estrogenic. They act like estrogen in your body, just the same as BPA. They're just as bad for your health.
So I'm thinking about myself, raising small kids. And I know, there's no way to not have plastic in my home, And so when I think about plastic, for us, it would be like plastic food containers or maybe kids' toys. So what can I do as a mom to protect my kids?
Yeah, so first of all, silicone is a great alternative. Most of the pacifiers, most of the infant products now are made from silicone. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, because it's not breakable. And the other thing is, there's a lot of things you can switch over to glass or stainless steel, like water bottles and things. You can find them now, and that's a great thing. And it's a worthwhile investment. They last a lot longer. But the other thing is, you're going to have some inevitable exposure. I don't want people to basically get, just overly hyped up about plastic. Hypochondriac, but people should definitely minimize plastic. There's, if you can eliminate it. And if you can't, that's fine. Just don't heat things in plastic. That's insane. Because anytime you're heating something, you speed up molecular motion. And it's amazing how many people do this. Like, for example, they put their, breast milk or in a baby's bottle, and it's got this plastic lining, and then they pop it in the microwave and they heat it up. Well, you increase the leaching of these phthalates into the breast milk so much. So, that's, it's almost common sense, but if you're not a scientist, right, you wouldn't be thinking about molecular motion or something like that. And the other thing is, so heat, obviously don't heat things in plastic. The other thing is, just the amount of time something sits in a bottle leads to a lot more leaching. So, you put something in the fridge, put it overnight, put it for a couple of days, not a big deal. You put something in for 6 months, a liquid into plastic, that becomes a lot more of a big deal. And there's not a lot of great studies on this. There was a study done with just conventional plastic bottles that if you go and get a 24-pack of water, and you get those plastic bottles, they showed that there was pretty high leaching of phthalates into that plastic within 24 hours in salt water. They put salt water in there and they shook it all night long on a machine. So yeah, it's with a lot of shaking, but that's about the best study I found that, is kind of relevant to our lives, which tells me there's there's obviously a problem with, plastics. And then the third thing, I talked about heat. I talked about just letting something sit for a long time. The other one other thing is oils. You got to be more careful with oils or fats that are sitting in plastics because you get a lot more leaching. So, like, for example, I studied fats, cholesterol, and health impacts from those. And I personally think a lot of the scientific, quote unquote, discoveries about how bad fat is for us are actually studying how bad plastics are for us. Because the fats they're using in research labs are stored in plastics, whether it's BPA or phthalate loaded plastic. And yeah, those fats have incredible levels of these chemicals. And then they're putting them into animals. And again, you're studying, something else than besides the fat. So it's confusing a lot of scientific research. It's unfortunate, but be really careful with oils and things. I really try and get my, olive oil in glass.
Dark glass, right?
I'm sorry? Oh, dark glass. Yeah. Definitely dark. Yeah, if you can, especially because that's oxidation. it blocks the UV. Yep.
And how about coconut oil?
I love coconut oil.
Yeah.
For sure. I did a whole podcast on it because when the American Heart Association came out and said it was bad,
right,
it was just so frustrating because there's just no evidence for that. I mean, they basically said coconut oil is a saturated fat, or mostly saturated fat, and saturated fat is bad, therefore coconut oil is bad. And there's so many things wrong with that. it just required an entire podcast. So coconut oil is healthy, and I'll just give you the one sentence explanation. And that is, coconut oil is made up of these really small fats called medium chain triglycerides, MCTs, for the most part. And I wish they were called small fats or small fatty acids or something, but they're medium chain, which makes them sound a little bigger, but they're really tiny. And your body can't store those as fat. It can't store MCT as fat. So if you eat a bunch of coconut oil or drink a bunch or whatever, you either have to get diarrhea to get that stuff out, or you've got to burn that as energy. You can't store it as fat. So you're not going to get fat from eating a bunch of coconut oil. You're not going to get inflammation because, the scientific research is pretty clear about it's anti-inflammatory, it's antifungal. It has all these beneficial properties. So it's crazy to me that somebody would say it's bad, and there's just no evidence for that.
Right. Yeah, I love coconut oil too. The only issue people are having with it is the smell. A lot of people don't like the way it smells. But
you can get I actually get refined coconut oil and unrefined.
Yeah.
And I use it, depending on the purpose. If I'm cooking eggs, I don't want, unrefined coconut oil with a coconut flavor. And the refined stuff is good because in the case of coconut oil, it's saturated, so it doesn't get oxidized. You don't have, this problem of these super oxidized fats, these weird transformations, trans fats, because it doesn't have a double bond. So essentially, it's better for cooking in that regard also. Like, for example, you don't want to cook olive oil because olive oil has double bonds. It has a lot of potential to become oxidized when you cook it. So you're better off using olive oil fresh on things cold.
Just on salads, yeah.
Yeah, and coconut oil, you can cook that and it doesn't become oxidized, which is another beauty of coconut oil.
Anthony, I have to ask you this. I know in the beginning, before that, you mentioned silicone, that it's a better option. And my husband always, because I switched completely to silicone, and my husband is always like, are you serious? Like, is this healthier? Like, can you actually put this in the oven? So can you talk about that? Is it okay to heat silicone?
Yeah, for sure. I've looked into this really carefully because like I say, I'm a hunter and I do a lot of hunting and wild game, and I butcher my own things. And, I haven't seen any good studies on wax paper, but I have a hunch that wax paper has a lot of petroleum byproducts. So it makes me nervous as a scientist. But silicone, is actually coated on the stuff called butcher paper, which is a different product. I guess you could probably call it baking sheets or something.
Parchment paper.
Yeah, parchment paper. And I had to do a lot of research into that because I wondered about that question, because I wrap my meat. So if I'm butchering an animal, I cut off a steak or whatever, and I wrap it in parchment paper. I don't want to say wax paper, parchment paper, butcher paper, and then I put it in plastic. And I use one of these vacuum sealers to pull out the air, and then I freeze it. So, meat's in plastic, not that big of a deal. There's not that much contact. It's a solid. But even so, just because I'm me, I do wrap it in butcher paper, parchment paper, and that's coated with silicone. And there's no evidence in the scientific research to show that that's unhealthy, and you can cook with that stuff. There's no weird chemicals that are leaching as far as I can tell. I'd like to see just a really straightforward study on that, but from the studies that are done, that I've looked at, I don't see any health problem with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Now I have a scientific proof for my husband.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're kind of digressing, but I know all of this is important information. Can we talk about the difference between our natural hormones that the body produces and how and these artificial ones and how they react in the body?
Yeah, for sure. So, because your audience is mostly women, I get this a lot where women oftentimes tell me that they're not that concerned about these estrogen chemicals because, they have natural estrogen. So their body probably isn't quite as sensitive as men. And what's really crazy about that is men have about 20 nanograms per liter of natural estrogen. So men have estrogen, it's really low, but we have some. So 20, just remember 20, you don't have to worry about the units. I mean, and by the way, nanograms is 10 to the minus 9 grams. So 0.000000001 grams. It's such a tiny amount. It's amazing we can even measure this. But so men are at 20 nanograms per liter, 20. Women range between 20, same as men, 20 and 400. So really not that far apart. Not like women are in the thousands and men are down at 20. Depending on the time of the month, women are at the same level as men, up to about 400. So what's really frustrating with these artificial estrogen chemicals is that the levels are in the thousands most of the time. In fact, atrazine is the second most used herbicide in North America. Totally illegal in Europe, by the way. But we spray it on our grains, especially corn. So buy organic corn. If you ever get corn, make sure it's organic. But atrazine in the drinking water, at least in America, the legally allowed limit is 3,000 nanograms per liter. That's how much we're allowed to have in our drinking water. So is that going to have an impact on your body? Definitely. And what's even crazier, they did a study on these feedlot cows, these cows that they put through these feedlots and feed them tons of corn. And they tested their blood for atrazine because, again, these cows are eating loads of corn. And the cows had 700,000 nanograms per liter of atrazine in their blood, which is insane. So, again, are we studying the red meat when we're doing studies, or are we studying all of these chemicals that, these conventional products, these conventional meat products are storing in their bodies? I contend that we're studying a lot of these chemicals a lot of times because they act at the nanogram level. That's a tiny, minuscule level. We haven't even been able to detect those levels until, fairly recently.
So can you talk about the health effects of this excess of estrogen, especially for women and girls? Like what should be the things that we should be looking out for, and what are sort of like the red lights for us to signify that there is an estrogen issue in the body?
Yeah, for sure. So in my book, I outlined 7 common health problems that we see with these chemicals. There's more, but really what happens is, as I started researching these chemicals, for example, parabens, phthalates, BPA, right, birth control, some of them have. And by the way, red food coloring is also estrogenic. A lot of people don't know that, especially with children. That's an issue because a lot of food products have this crazy red dye, which is just so frustrating. But I mean, it goes back to the processing in our country. We're processing all our food. It comes out looking like brown mush, so they put this red dye in there. And they could use beet extract, from natural beets, and that's healthy, but they don't. They use red 40. It's cheap, this artificial red food coloring. But so when I started looking at all these chemicals, I started to see patterns. And one of the, for example, red food coloring, you see a lot of ADHD. It increases attention deficit. But most of the other chemicals, they don't have that. You don't see that. So I think that's specific to red food coloring and not specific to estrogen. But a better example is fertility. You see infertility or decreases for infertility, sperm counts, the whole thing, men and women. With all of these, you start seeing that pattern. And so that makes my list because I consider that more of an estrogen-related issue as opposed to a specific issue to BPA or specific to phthalates or specific to red food coloring. So low testosterone is another one of those, and that's affecting men and women today. And there's a lot of health problems associated with that, but that's a common theme you see with these chemicals. Certain types of cancer, breast cancer. So breast cancer is up 250% since 1980. In America, it's up over 500% in the Philippines and a lot of these countries that are more industrial. They're becoming industrial real rapidly. but at least in America, up 250% since 1980. And, we're passing out pink ribbons and all this. And, we're not really talking about the real problem, which is artificial estrogen chemicals. So that's another one. You see breast cancer, weight gains. That's a huge one. Estrogen, essentially the way I like to explain it is when a woman is pregnant, your estrogen goes way up. There's no question. And what that does in your body is it tells your body to store more fat. And that's a good thing. That's a natural response, because at one point, our ancestors didn't have the food availability. So we needed to store more fat. That's an incredibly good energy reserve. So it's the most efficient form of energy storage is fat. So essentially what happens is if the mother isn't able to find food, she needs that fat storage. She needs those fatty acids to release and to feed the baby. Nowadays, we don't have that problem, but you still get the increases in fat with estrogen. And artificial estrogen, of course, kind of disrupts that. It mimics that process. It tricks your body. You think you're pregnant. You start storing more fat, and obviously you don't need that fat. You're not pregnant, and so it mixes up the signals inside your body. So a lot of them, right? I'm throwing a lot of them at you here, but the other big one I want to get out there is depression. All these chemicals, the more you research them, the more you realize if the studies have been done, they're linked to depression. And that's a difficult thing to study because it's kind of arbitrary. People either don't report it a lot of times, they don't admit to it. So a lot of times you have to look at suicide numbers and things like that. For example, birth control increases rates of suicide a significant amount.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and again, it's in our drinking water. Birth control is especially high in drinking water in cities because our filtration systems aren't removing it. So you can find scientific studies that say, oh, there's no birth control in the water. And then you look at where those studies are done, and they're done in the middle of nowhere. And it's like, well, yeah, there's not birth control in the water in the middle of nowhere. But you go into Boston or you go to New York City or Edmonton or whatever Canadian city, and you'll find it. And the crazy thing is, if you go out in the country, you usually find a lot of atrazine, so it's kind of a lose-lose. But you have to filter your water. You really do. You've got to put the charcoal filter on.
Okay, I'm happy you're bringing that up because I wanted to ask you that question. A lot of people, most people who I work with, they don't filtrate the water. Why? Because it's safe to drink city water.
No,
right?
No, yeah.
Now, okay, so then when I tell them you have to filtrate your water, usually what they do, they would go to Walmart and get a Brita filter. So can you talk about why this is not good enough?
So first of all, city water, it kills bacteria, it kills viruses. They put a lot of chemicals in to kill these things, but that doesn't remove these hormones. There's a difference between killing a bacteria, which is an organism, which is a pretty large organism compared to a chemical, and actually removing the bacteria or the chemical. So again, we're great at doing that. We're great at killing bacteria and viruses. So it's quote unquote safe in that regard.
Right.
But it's not safe because it has these hormonal effects. It has these hormones. Well, again, whether it's birth control, and a lot of plastics are showing up in the water. I think globally, it's over 80% of water supplies have plastics, high levels of phthalates in them. And America was at 93% of water supplies that they tested. Just basically all the water has a lot of plastics. And that study didn't even look at BPA. That was in the news fairly recently. So, you've got to filter your water. There's no question. I personally use a Berkey filter.
Yay, me too. Yay.
Yeah.
How about Santevia? There's another one on the market called Santevia. How is that?
I don't know that one. I'm not super up to date. I actually have on my website, I get asked a lot of questions, so I should probably throw this out there. On my website, AJ Consulting Company, I actually list the products that I use, and I don't get any money from any of them. I just tell people, here's what I use, because otherwise everybody asks me. So if you go to AJ Consulting.
Yeah, I'll link in the show notes below. You'll have it.
Thanks. Yeah, it's ajconsultingcompany.com/what I use. And that's all one word, what I use. Mm-hmm. And that literally shows what soap I use, and this is me, my family, not just me, but all these different products, because there's cheap alternatives. You don't always have to spend a lot of money. You can find good bar soap that's cheap without the fragrances and the chemicals. And again, Berkey is a similar situation where, I did some homework at one point and I went with Berkey. It's stainless steel, so you're not sitting the water in plastic, which I don't like. But the good thing about Brita, I recommend people filter their water at all costs, whether they have to use a plastic filter, whether they have to use, pure Brita, whatever. Just filter it to start with, and then, ideally use something really, really excellent, but you got to at least filter it, I think, for sure. And the Berkey, most of them have activated charcoal nowadays, which is, that's the key component. That's what you're looking for. If it doesn't have activated charcoal, don't get it. I'm talking about water filters, because activated charcoal, I used to use it in scientific research. I've published professional scientific research journal in papers on activated charcoal. It removes hormones, it removes fats, it removes lipids. So anything that, again, quote unquote, floats on water, it pulls those out. And that's why it's critically important to have activated charcoal. And of course, Berkey has that. It has these big charcoal, cylinders in it. But so do a lot of the other filters. I also like those ones that attach directly to the sink and you flip them up and down, just because then people aren't sitting their water in plastics. They're drinking it fairly direct and they're running it through charcoal. So I do like those. I like Berkey better, but I also like to keep the minerals in there and I like the flavor. So that's just me.
I also want to ask you, one of your YouTube videos, and we're like so all over the place with this interview. It's just okay. I've heard you say that flax and soy are also estrogenics. Can you, because I don't know, at least me as a nutritionist, I thought that flax is good for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So there was a study actually done in Canada, and it was a great study because, when I'm doing research on things like this, it's really difficult sometimes because you have to look at 100 different papers and try and piece together things. But there was a really big study done in Canada on food items and estrogen, and it was plant estrogen, phytoestrogen. So these plants secrete hormones just like people, just like animals. They need hormones to grow. And sometimes those hormones in plants act like estrogen in humans. It's called phytoestrogen. Phyto means plant. And this particular study looked at over 100 food items, and just purely for phytoestrogen. And they actually quantified it. They said, okay, black beans, for example, had 9 micrograms of phytoestrogen per 100 gram. 9. So that's pretty low. I mean, you have to eat a lot of black beans to get, even 9 micrograms. Chickpeas had like 13 micrograms. Soybeans had over 100,000 micrograms per 100 gram. Yep.
Regardless if it's organic, it doesn't matter.
No, the organic doesn't matter, but what does matter is if it was fermented. So for example, naturally fermented soy sauce was about 100. It was like 123 or something compared to 100,000, that's nothing. So if you've got natural, and what happens, of course, in America is we pretend we're fermenting things in our industrial food processing plants. They make soy sauce, but they don't actually ferment it. They kind of hack the system or cheat the system. So you do want to watch for stuff like that. But natto, there's a bunch of naturally fermented soy products that are perfectly good that don't have phytoestrogen because those microorganisms break the estrogen down. But if it's not fermented, you find incredible levels of phytoestrogen, and which lowers sperm content. It messes with your thyroid gland. It does all this stuff. You find it in in those soy products. And like you said, flax also made the list because that one was over 300,000.
Wow.
And those, by the way, flax and soy were the only ones that were above 1,000. Wow. Everything else was under 1,000. Soy was 100,000. Flax was 300,000. The interesting thing about flax is that, well, number one, it's a seed. So oftentimes the estrogen stays with the seed and just goes through your intestinal tract. But number two, your gut bacteria seem to enjoy flax, and they break a lot of it down for you. If you have a healthy gut, which is kind of a risky thing that's a big if these days, because not a lot of people do. So I don't risk it. I don't consider it a health food personally because yes, it has great omega fatty acids, which are super important and hard to find, but it has a lot of estrogen. So, if you don't have any of the health issues that we've been talking about, yeah, you can probably eat flax. It's probably not going to be a big deal. If you've got breast cancer, if you struggle with low testosterone, whatever, I would definitely avoid it. So there's kind of a spectrum in terms of how cautious you want to be and how much you trust your gut bacteria. And then the other thing is, that's interesting thing about these natural plant estrogens is, assuming you have a super healthy gut and they break these things down, some of the breakdown products, when they get into your body, are actually really healthy. Okay, so that can be kind of an ironic twist, right? So let's say you eat a lot of flax and you've got a healthy gut, your gut bacteria break those down, and then those breakdown products actually act healthy. The opposite of what happens if you have an unhealthy gut. So again, that's kind of nuanced, but it's important for people to realize, because you don't want to go crazy over this stuff. I mean, I don't think our bodies, like or have naturally adapted to eating a lot of soy or flax. Yeah. For example, I used to live in farm country in Minnesota, and I'd go out in the soybean fields and pick soybeans just by hand and eat them, which I'm sure it was terrible because they're sprayed with so many things, but I didn't know that. I was a kid. And, you eat like 5 or 6 soybeans that are growing on the plants, and your body, after about 5 or 6, you're kind of satiated. You're kind of done with them. It's like, they're kind of waxy, and your mind, your taste buds, your body just tells you, okay, that's enough of that. Problem is, we process them. We put so much salt on them. We put all this stuff in them, and you can trick your mind into thinking, oh, I'll eat like a whole plate of this stuff. And yeah, it becomes an issue. Right.
Oh, well, how about chia seeds?
Chia seeds are, there's no estrogen.
Okay, good.
Yep. And I mean, so a good source of fatty acids. My preference is the fish oil / algae oil type stuff for DHA and EPA. But yeah, I mean, omega-3s are so important that, well, I'm writing a book on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about something you mentioned, weight gain. And, I work with women and girls, and obviously one of the main reasons they come to me is because of weight gain. So I wanted you to talk about how estrogenics contribute, or maybe it's even responsible for excessive weight gain, but with girls who obviously weren't pregnant yet, because there are so many teens and girls who suffer from weight gain. And it's a puzzle to me. Why is it happening other than genetics? But why? Yeah. Maybe is there anything with estrogenics that we are overlooking?
Oh, for sure. In fact, I did a podcast on the Keto Diet podcast, an interview with them, and they called the podcast "How to Overcome Weight Plateaus," because a lot of people go on the keto diet and they do super well, they lose a lot of weight, but then they plateau at a certain point. And to kind of overcome that, you really do have to get rid of these chemicals that are telling your body to store that fat, to hang on to that fat. And these artificial estrogen chemicals are the chemical, because they're so common, they're so pervasive, and that's what they're doing in your body. They're saying, hang on to that fat. So there's a good study to kind of illustrate, to answer your question. It was done with 2 groups of rats, and they gave the 2 groups of rats exactly the same exercise, exactly the same calories, the whole thing, everything exactly the same. The only difference was, in one of the groups, they gave atrazine in their drinking water. Again, that's that herbicide. Low dose atrazine, by the way, not just atrazine. And they were intentional about low dose atrazine because that's how much we humans are getting in our drinking water. And they found the group with the atrazine got fat. Same calories, same exercise, the whole thing. They had fatty livers. They had all kinds of fat, deposits in their body. I mean, and that's about as strong of evidence as, you want to see with this stuff, because obviously you can't do a study like that with humans, because it's unethical to be giving humans atrazine. Right. But unfortunately, we're all getting it, right?
Exactly, yeah.
and what's really ironic is they've tried to do studies like that with phthalates, with these plastic chemicals, and we can't find a group of people that don't have phthalates. So they literally went up to Alaska and used like Alaskan natives. And I have kind of that story in my book because, you know, that's how extreme we have to be as researchers to try and find a group that's not exposed to at least some of these chemicals. But let me think. So in terms of fat, what happens is you're trying to lose weight, but these chemicals, I call it the estrogenic paradox, because not only do they cause fat, but they store in the fat. And that's the paradox, is that you're trying to lose weight, but they're sitting in the fat cells. And by the way, our fat cells can survive. They can live in your body an average of 1.5 years. Your average fat cell lives 1.5 years, and they can live up to 10 years. So that's a long, long time for a cell. And obviously those estrogen chemicals can stay right there with them all that time. And so that's a problem, because you're trying to burn that fat, and that chemical is sitting in there saying, no, hang on to this fat. I need it for my baby or whatever. You know, that's the chemical equivalent of what it's trying to signal, what it's saying, what it's communicating. So what do you do, right? I mean, what do you do when you've got these chemicals in the fat? You're trying to lose that fat. Ideally, you get in the sauna and you heat them up. You move you speed up the molecular motion. And I think this is one of the reasons saunas are so beneficial. There's no question in the scientific research that number one, sweating eliminates a lot of these. I was just looking at studies yesterday that showed that, you know, if they put these patches on people's skin and then they take them off after a week, and they have different people sitting in saunas, people not sitting in saunas, you know, different conditions, and they find a lot more BPA, phthalates, all these chemicals on these patches.
Leaching out from the body.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially if you're sitting in saunas. And there's no question, again, saunas decrease so many health problems. Saunas improve all-cause mortality, according to just recent research this year. And what that means is they reduce your death rate for any disease, all-cause mortality. It doesn't matter if it's Alzheimer's, doesn't matter if it's heart disease, doesn't matter, whatever. All-cause mortality is reduced from saunas. And the kind of Goldilocks zone for sitting in a sauna, like it's not too hot, not too cold, like the middle ground, the perfect time, is supposedly you have to be in there at least 11 minutes to see these benefits. So I just say 10 minutes for people, but at least 10 to 20 minutes, and at least 4 times a week, which is pretty regular and frequent. So, you know, thankfully they sell really cheap portable saunas. You don't need an infrared sauna. You can, as long as you're sweating, you're going to see benefits according to the research. There's obviously different degrees of benefits. Different people respond differently. You don't want to sit in there when you're pregnant, all this kind of stuff. But without a doubt, I think that's the best way to detox from these estrogen chemicals if you're struggling with the weight gains, besides eliminating the chemicals, right? We've got to eliminate them, because you can't just keep stuffing them into your body.
And then going to sauna.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle.
So with foods, and then the plastics and the water. Yeah, I hear you. I totally agree. Can you also talk about MSG? Because, you know, I've looked online, and there's such a conflicting information. Some scientists say that MSG, you know, it's not so bad. And then some say, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing ever. So can you talk about that?
I don't know. I've done research on it, and my conclusion was that it's not that bad in the studies. I mean, but it does get tricky, because there's no question glutamate, which is an amino acid, which is naturally found in meats and vegetables and everything. It's just a natural amino acid that's used by your brain to fire, you know, and as an excitatory molecule. So if you overdose that, in theory, right, it should be overexcitatory. It can kill neurons. The problem is your body regulates that really carefully with your intestine and all this. So, for example, if you put MSG directly on neuron cells in a dish in a lab, it'll kill the cells, yeah. So you can make an argument that it kills neurons. The problem is your body doesn't work that way, and if you get it in your intestine, you know, it breaks it down, it regulates how much is getting into your brain, into your blood. And you know, supplementing just straight up glutamine can be really healthy for your gut bacteria and your intestine. So I keep hearing that it's so terrible. I haven't seen the research myself to prove that. So I don't worry too much about it. But if you have a personal experience, like you get a headache from it or something, I mean, there's no research to back that up, but honestly, personal experience trumps research, like don't trust the researchers in a lot of these cases, because there is a lot of bias. There is a lot of government influence, corporate influence. So, and that's true of a lot of these chemicals. You asked earlier why they're not illegal, and that's a huge component of it, is that there is a lot of corporate influence. These companies make a killing. They make so much money, and they do influence a lot of the research. They fund a lot of the research. In fact, I wrote a chapter in my book about this, and I thought the editors were going to take it out, about the bias and the spin and the corporate influence, because it's not really about artificial estrogens. It's about spin and bias and corporate influence. But all the editors, almost about 75, 80% of them came back to me and they said, this is our favorite chapter.
Wow.
So I said, well, I guess I got
that's the truth, because that's the truth.
Yeah.
All right. So I actually have a personal question from a listener.
Okay.
And she writes, so last time I went to the doctor, he said that I need my Synthroid to stabilize my thyroid. But I haven't yet got rid of my hypothyroid symptoms, even though my levels are normal. So I've also had problems with my periods since I was a teen. The doctors are always quick to give me an estrogen hormone pill, but never explained my estrogen was low, nor how I could cure and reverse PCOS. I refuse to believe I have to take pills my whole life just to be in a normal range, but still be controlled by the symptoms of my disease. So she asks, why are synthetic estrogen / hormone replacements the only cure for these diseases if they aren't working for a lot of people?
Yeah, wow. Good question. I mean, a lot of this is dependent on what age people are, and whether for the case of thyroid, anytime somebody talks about their thyroid issues, I always flag soy, and you want to know if this person is eating soy, because more than any of these other chemicals, soy alters your thyroid. But in terms of the hormone replacement therapy type things, I just interviewed a scientist. I ate lunch with him here at the Mayo Clinic. He's an epigenetic researcher. And this question kind of brings up this concept of epigenetics, and I'll explain that in a second. But this researcher, he had found, he was specifically highlighting polycystic ovarian issues and various fibrotic issues in the ovaries, because he studies artificial estrogen chemicals, among other things. And so epigenetics are marks on top of your DNA, and they can be passed to future generations. So I like to explain it like with musical notes. So if you think of just really simple song written on a piece of paper, it's just a single dot, like black dots. That's Mary Had a Little Lamb. It's a simple song. And that's like your DNA. You can pass that to somebody else. They can play the same song. It's pretty simple. They can pass that on. Doesn't really change. What does change is if you add chords to that song and you make the song more complex. Those are epigenetics. That's marks on top of the DNA. You can pass that music to somebody else and they can play the more complex song, okay? And the reason this is an important concept is because these chemicals, all of these chemicals, these hormones, these estrogens, they change those marks on your DNA. They change your epigenetics. And the reason that's important is because your mother and what she was exposed to can literally have a huge impact on your health, and especially in terms of ovarian issues. And that's, again, what this particular scientist I was just eating lunch with talks about. That's his focus. And he's studied atrazine, he studies BPA, he studies phthalates, he studies a bunch of these. And he found that some of these estrogen chemicals don't affect you personally, but they affect only your future offspring. He raises 3,000 to 5,000 mice at any given time, which is crazy expensive if you think. I mean,
yeah,
these labs charge you so much money per mouse. It's amazing. And he tests future generations. He exposes them to chemicals, and then he looks at the offspring and multiple, all the way up to 4 generations. He finds effects 4 generations later. And so sometimes in these cases where it's real nuanced, like this person, you actually have an issue where your mother was taking a hormone when you were in utero or even before that. There's something called diethylstilbestrol, DES, DES. A lot of women were prescribed this estrogen chemical for morning sickness. And that causes a lot of the problems that this person is listing. So it may be something that was literally, a lot of years back that's coming out now. And so to actually resolve that problem, I don't think artificial hormone replacement is the answer in all cases, for sure. You definitely want to avoid the artificial estrogens, though. So that's a good place to start. See what happens, right? And soy, like I said, if it sounds to me like this person is eating a lot of soy, get that out of your diet, and eat a lot of cholesterol. You don't hear that from most doctors, but in this case, without a doubt, you want to eat cholesterol because, number one, it's a precursor for making sex hormones, which is estrogen, which is testosterone. So if you're eating a lot of cholesterol, what happens in a lot of cases is the doctors are prescribing people statins, which blocks your body's ability to make cholesterol is so important your body makes it. And statins block your body's ability to make it. So then you need to eat it from your diet. But if you're not eating it and you're taking statins, you're going to have an issue making sex hormones, making natural estrogen, making testosterone. So, be careful with that too.
Oh my gosh, that has been amazing, Anthony. Thank you so much. All right, so before we wrap up, I have a few questions I ask all my guests, and they're usually geared toward women, but I'm curious to have a male perspective on this as well. Are you ready?
Oh, sure.
All right, so what is your perspective on self-care? How do you take care of your body, mind, soul, and spirit? What are some of your non-negotiables?
Wow, yeah, self-care.
I know you didn't expect that.
No, that's a good question. No, I think that's the ultimate form of healthcare because you can't trust somebody else to take care of you, and I think that's true politically. I think that's true in terms of our health. You have to take charge of your life, and honestly, it's difficult. It's more difficult now than ever because our food is no longer organic across the board. I think our grandparents had organic food across the board. It wasn't called organic, but it was organic. So there's certain things you literally just have to prioritize a little bit more. You have to pay more money for. It's worth it. And that's what I do. And I especially with my children, I hunt and I fish. So I save a lot of money by doing a lot of things myself, gardening and all that. And I really recommend people do stuff like that. And what I did in Boston, I was living in Boston, but I had a little tiny piece of grass between my neighbor's house and my house, and I literally ripped out all the grass and I put in a garden, and it looked kind of silly, but it worked, and we got amazing amounts of stuff from that garden. So there's a lot of things. We pray every night with my kids. I'm a Catholic. We actually go to church every morning. I did it throughout my PhD, even here now. So you can be incredibly busy, but still prioritize your spiritual life. I consider soul first and then mind and then body kind of as the priority for living my life. And I kind of, make decisions in that regard. So that's not really related to health, but it's all connected.
It is. It is.
You can't overlook.
Especially in this conversation of epigenetics. I know we spoke about it really a little bit, but now I'm learning about the emotional aspect of epigenetics. It's mind-boggling, it's crazy. All right, thank you for that. So what advice does your now father self would have given to your pre-daddy self?
Oh man, well that's especially interesting in my case because before I was a father, I was stressing myself. I got all stressed out. I was a double major in college and a double minor. I did biology and theology. And I literally brought allergies upon myself. I didn't have allergies my entire life, but I was so stressed out my senior year. I was sleeping 3 hours a night and all this. And I got allergies. And it took me about 5 years to get rid of those allergies, and a lot of lifting weights and kind of exercising, barefoot running and all this like you talked about, and eating healthy. And that was that's something that, I shouldn't have done. I definitely would prioritize my health a lot more than I did. And it has long-term ramifications. I'm still kind of struggling in certain respects from some of those health issues that I'm still trying to heal myself. So I definitely wouldn't have, gotten down that point. I think exercise was the big one. I had kind of removed heavy lifting. And me personally, I really benefit from things like deadlifting and obviously with proper form, but it's amazing how much better I sleep, how much better I feel. And I have to prioritize that. And I would have a long time ago if I would have known that.
All right. So I like to keep it real and show listeners that even though someone is an expert in one area, they might be struggling with other things. And I think you kind of mentioned that already. So what are some of your current challenges as a man, husband, or father?
Yeah. So I think the big one, just like absolutely right now, is that I want to live out in the country. And Rochester is a great town in Minnesota because there's the Mayo Clinic and then there's nothing once you get outside of town. So it's a good opportunity, but I don't right now. I live in the city still, and it's difficult for me because I want some land. I want, a place to have a garden and for my kids to run around and the whole thing. In fact, I'm going to raise cows. I used to raise cows when I was a really little kid. Even though my dad was a doctor, he bought some land and it was already fenced in. And I said, hey, can I get some cows? And then I just raised cows to make money. But now I want to raise cows specifically for the meat. So that's something, like I said, I prioritize it so much because I don't want to make that mistake with my children, where I think a lot of parents do this where they kind of give their children the cheapest products they can find. And they kind of spoil themselves a little bit. And I think that's backwards. And especially because when the younger you are, the more stem cells you have that are going to impact the rest of your life. And so you want those stem cells to be really healthy, the epigenetic marks on those cells. So I think children need to eat healthier than adults, and a lot of that is up to parents. And when I say eat healthy, I also mean exercise, get fresh air, get outside, run around barefoot. I mean, that's the whole package.
Right.
And that's something I want. I'm really trying to get more into my life.
I love that. What do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
As somebody who isn't out to make money and just really out to help people, because that's something I enjoy. I enjoy seeing people, that are interested in something, interested in making an improvement and actually making that improvement. So motivation, I appreciate it when I have clients or people that are motivated. That's one of the reasons I work with professional athletes, because there's almost nobody out there who's as motivated as a professional athlete. So when you tell them to avoid red food coloring or whatever, they do it. And some people struggle with that. And I don't fault them for that, but I do want to get the information out there. I want people to see the truth and not see some kind of corporate influence through the things that I say.
Thank you. Any last advice for mothers, parents, fathers, anybody who is raising themselves and raising children?
I think again, I would go back to exercise and sleep, because you really do have to prioritize that, or it catches up to you eventually. You might say, well, I did it for the last couple of years and I was fine, but it does catch up to you and it's not worth it.
Oh my gosh, Anthony, that has been, I think, the most information-packed interview I've ever had. Thank you so much. So Before I let you go, can you talk about the free resources you have on your site? I think the ones that I loved are the estrogenic avoidance plans, and I think you have 3 of them. And then there's the updated list of estrogenic substances. Can you just mention them so that people know? And I will link to them in the show notes.
Yeah, so I have these plans. Like I said, if you're a super high level elite athlete or something, you want to avoid these chemicals more than most people. Or if you've got breast cancer or something. So I called that the gold level plan. But then for like normal people, you don't need to go that extreme. So then I have a silver level plan. But then if you're on a real tight budget, if you're in college or something, I have kind of a bronze level plan. Those are all free on my website. They're in my book, of course, but they're free. The list of estrogen chemicals, they're on my website for free. I do the YouTube channel every week. Again, obviously free. And all of that, you can find all that just directly on my website, or you can just search around on YouTube. And
right. And then I'm also going to link up to the list, the what I use personal care products list also, right? And then there is the podcast. What's the name of the podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast that I run is called Chagrin and Tonic.
I have to ask you, what does it mean, chagrin and tonic?
So chagrin, so it's kind of sounds like gin and tonic, so I like it. But really, chagrin is like when you look at something with disgust, like it kind of surprises you, like the current medical system. And tonic is kind of like how to fix something. It's like a resolution. So it's kind of like a surprise disgust. And then
it's sort of like the Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, and then here's the fix, here's how you can kind of fix your problem. And honestly, my podcast isn't really a podcast. It's more just my YouTube videos that are compiled into something that's audio, so people don't have to go and watch. They can just listen to my audio.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for everything that you do for us. I know you didn't expect, someone who has a podcast from us.
Oh, that's good.
But good. Yeah, this book is reaching out people all over. And I'm so glad that one of my listeners introduced me to you. I learned so much. Thank you so much for everything. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Health Begins with Mom show. I love hearing from you, so please post your comments and questions over at healthbeginswithmom.com/podcast. If you love the show, please share it on social media and in your real life with other moms who might enjoy this content. And if you have a burning question or topic you'd like me to hit on the show, just drop me a line at dorit@healthbeginswithmom.com. And if you love this show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Much love and many blessings.